The ribs are a set of bones in the thorax that fit together to protect the contents of the cavity they create, the thoracic cavity. Let's visualize them literally in this Picmonic. The ribs move to increase and decrease the size of the thoracic cavity as a way to assist in lung respiration. The ribs are divided based on anatomy into two types, typical and atypical. The typical ribs are shown literally by these typical ribs. Ribs 3 to 10 are called the typical ribs because they all resemble each other and each articulate with two vertebrae. Ribs 1, 2, 11, and 12 are atypical ribs, shown by the ATP. This means that they only correspond with one vertebrae, or they are anatomically unlike the rest of the ribs. A good trick to remember which ribs are atypical is to know that any rib with the numbers 1 or 2 is atypical. This is shown by the ATP ribs holding one wand and a 2 tutu. Rib 10 is represented by the man in the tin cup. Remember that rib 10 articulates only with the T10 vertebrae, so there is disagreement as to whether it is typical or atypical. The second way to classify the ribs is based on their attachments. All ribs connect posteriorly with the spine, but the anterior portion of the ribs articulate in different ways based on their type. The true ribs are demonstrated in this Picmonic by the true buzzer. They are ribs 1 through 7 and are called true because they articulate anteriorly with the sternum. The false ribs are shown by the false buzzer. The false ribs are ribs 8 to 10 and are considered false because they articulate anteriorly with the costal cartilage. The floating ribs are ribs 11 and 12, shown in this Picmonic by the float. The floating ribs do not articulate with anything anteriorly. Ribs can also be classified based on their movement. Ribs 1 through 5 are the pump handle ribs, shown by the pump handle stemming from the spine. With pump handle motion, the anterior portion of the rib moves superior and inferior with respiration, and the posterior position of the rib stays relatively still. Ribs 6 through 10 are bucket handle ribs, shown by the bucket beside the ribs. In bucket handle motion, the lateral aspect of the shaft moves superiorly with inhalation and inferiorly with exhalation, while the most anterior and posterior portions stay relatively still. Caliper motion is found in ribs 11 and 12 and is shown by this pair of calipers. In caliper motion, the ribs move inferiorly and laterally in inhalation, and during exhalation, they move superior and medial. Note that caliper motion is the only motion in which the ribs move inferior with respiration. Somatic dysfunctions of the ribs occur when a rib will not move through its entire range of motion and is stuck in inhalation or exhalation. An inhalation dysfunction occurs when a rib or group of ribs is stuck in the inhalation part of the respiratory cycle. Inhalation dysfunctions can be treated by targeting the bottom rib. This is shown by the man rapidly inhaling. An exhalation dysfunction is characterized as a rib or group of ribs that is stuck in exhalation and will not move fully into inhalation. An exhalation dysfunction is treated by targeting the top rib. This is shown by the man vigorously exhaling. The key ribs to treat in somatic dysfunctions can be remembered by the mnemonic BITE. Bottom, inhalation, top, exhalation. This is shown by the man biting a rack of ribs. In summary, typical ribs are ribs that resemble each other anatomically and articulate with two vertebrae. Atypical ribs have some anatomic difference or articulate with only a single vertebrae. The atypical ribs can be remembered by knowing that they contain the numbers 1 or 2. Rib 10 is sometimes considered atypical because it is only attached to a single vertebrae. Ribs 1 through 7 are true ribs because they articulate in the front with the sternum. Ribs 8 through 10 are false ribs and articulate anteriorly with costal cartilage. Ribs 11 and 12 are floating ribs that do not articulate anteriorly with anything. Ribs 1 through 5 move in a pump handle motion. Ribs 6 through 10 move in a bucket handle motion. Ribs 11 and 12 move in a caliper motion. Ribs can have inhalation or exhalation dysfunctions. In an inhalation dysfunction, the key rib to treat is the bottom rib, and in an exhalation dysfunction, the key rib to treat is the top rib. This can be remembered by the mnemonic BITE: bottom, inhalation, top, exhalation.
Let's talk about ribs. Most of the ribs are typical, like the ones you see here. However, some are atypical. The atypical ribs can be found on the top and bottom of the rib cage. So let's imagine two ATPs at the top and bottom here. In each ATP, you can find wands and tutu ballerinas. This is a great way to remember the atypical ribs because these ribs have the numbers 1 or 2, such as 1, 2, 10, 11, and 12. Sometimes rib 10 is considered typical or atypical, depending on which anatomist you talk to. So let's represent that with this shrugging dude in a tent.
For the rest of the story, check out Picmonic.com and sign up for a free account. There, you can also take Picmonic's quiz. The quiz automatically sets up your daily quiz by using spaced repetition algorithms based on the questions you've missed or struggled with to make sure you study what you need when you need to.
And while you're there, check out the rest of our body regions Picmonics. We've got all the content you'll need to remember. Everything from cranial 2, strain patterns, cranial motion and structural exam, sacrum motion and structural exam, sacrum 2, somatic dysfunctions of the sacrum, innominates, and so much more, so you can lock down on everything you need to know forever.
Play, quiz, and spaced repetition. Efficient, effective, and research proven to increase exam scores.